Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Saratoga History Podcast. My name is Bilal Aftab. I'm the mayor here in Saratoga. We started this podcast this year as a way of telling those stories that make Saratoga Saratoga, sharing our history, and letting you learn more about your community. You can reach out to us if you have any questions or feedback. We're available at podcast@saratogahistory.com. For today's episode, we're coming to you from a really special place. We're at the Saratoga Library, and we're in a special place called the Maple Room. And we're here with two of our very special librarians. We're here with our chief librarian in Saratoga, Saralyn, and our county librarian, Jennifer. Hi, how's it going?
Hello, Mayor. How are you today?
I'm doing well. Excited to be here. So tell me about the Maple Room. What is this? What is this room used for?
Now it's used for library programs. When the renovation happened, this was we called it the Learning Lab. Basically like a computer training room. At the time, it was like they didn't all have home computers, but they needed to be learning different software programs and things like that. So that's how it was originally set up. And there was a bunch of computers in here.
So that's how the librarians know everything. Yeah.
Yeah. But over the years, things have changed. Everyone has their home computers. They don't need that as much. When we do training on like coding or something, people bring their own computers usually. And we also have laptops you can check out and things like that. So we didn't need all the computers in here. So we transformed the room so we could use it in general for programming. And it's been great because programming is very popular and we have a lot of it. And we always were having conflicts in our main community room. So
I think that'll be a theme of today, just talking about transformation of the library and how it's changed over time. But why don't you start by telling us a little bit about yourselves? Both of you would love to hear a bit about what brought you to Saratoga in the first place in this library, but also what do you do as a librarian?
Sure, absolutely. So I have really felt that librarians come to libraries because it impacted them. And libraries were a special thing for them in their lives. Certainly they like books. So I would say you'll probably find a lot of people in this building that like to read. However, for me personally, I moved around a lot, kid. And every time we moved to a new town, we found the library. And that was the connection. It was the way to meet new people. It was the way to involve yourself in a community. It was a way for our family to find kind of footing. And so in my mind, I can remember libraries all over the U.S. as we went from coast to coast. So I always knew libraries were impactful personally. And so that really led me to the profession. Now, as a librarian, right now I'm really privileged to serve as the director of the library district, of which Saratoga Library is one of our 8. And so my work is a little more community focused, right? So libraries certainly are about bringing people together. And so we have opportunity to really be that trusted place for information, for connection. So that's a lot of work in libraries now. It really is creating partnership. It's creating pathways to resource and lifelong learning for residents in Saratoga. So that's the opportunity I have right now.
And if I recall properly, you have a special connection to this library because even though you are director of the county library in general, you have a special connection with this library. What's that?
Absolutely do. So a number of years ago, back in 2005, I actually began my career here as a children's librarian. So it is really a special place in my heart because I spent over a decade here serving the community and working with youth and schools here in Saratoga to really just instill the joy of learning here in Saratoga. So it's a very special place for me.
And Saralyn, how about you?
My mom was a librarian. So when I was in high school and saving up for college, she suggested I try out to be a page at the library. The pages are the ones who reshelve the books. So I got that job, and I was like all through high school and college. I worked as a page. I did clerking. I worked in the main office, and then when I was figuring out my profession, my career, she said, well, have you thought about library school? Because we have at San Jose State has a program right here. And I had really enjoyed working in the library environment and the work. So I was like, yeah, let's do it. So that's what I did. And I worked as a librarian at many different locations. I was down in LA for years working as a children's and teen librarian. And then I finally came back up to be the children's supervising librarian at Morgan Hill for the county. I was there 17 years until I finally made the move to community librarian here at Saratoga. So I've been here a couple of years.
What does community librarian mean?
You're like the manager of the library.
Okay,
basically.
very cool. Yeah. And as someone who's been, I guess, I don't know what, like a consumer of the library in Saratoga since I was a kid. It is like a very special place for me. Spent a lot of time coming here growing up, checking out books. Also, a lot of memories of studying for different exams and just doing homework, and but also just like having school group meetings here and things like that. So yeah, it's a very special place I think for a lot of people. And I think like we'll talk about today. I think libraries in terms of like what they serve, how they serve the community, like it's changing today. But I think it's always been changing. I think that's something I've learned. We just installed in the children's section here a play area, right? And we've seen attendance here go through the roof as it's become a really special place for families and parents to bring young kids to engage with the library in a new way. Before we get to sort of where we are today, maybe it's worth us taking a look back and seeing where we started. So do we have a sense of like what the first library in Saratoga was?
Yeah, so I can talk a little bit about that. So back in 1914, they actually established the county library system. And so there created an opportunity. So in the city, well, not even the city at the time. So
because Saratoga was formed in 1956.
Right. So, but back in that time, there was a drugstore in the town-ish village area that you have. And Mr. Buckley gave a corner of his drugstore to become the library. So it was shelves of books, and his wife, Clara Buckley, was essentially the first librarian, and it did encourage people to come in to his business. So I think there was a little bit of incentive there for him to have the library in that space because it did bring people in.
So the first library was really the corner of a drugstore.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
And like not like Safeway or CVS, like a locally owned drugstore by someone who probably lived in Saratoga, and their family ran that business, and they had a bunch of books where you could come in and check them out.
Exactly. And I think
this was prior to the county library system being formed.
Yes, it was just about the same time. Actually, they really had, after the Civil War, it was kind of this beginnings of new free public libraries, right? Because for years and years, it was a subscription model, and it was like moving things around. And so really at the beginning, right, of the century, if it was that idea of having a space, a collection that would be free and open to all. That's really the mission of public libraries. So, right, being in that drugstore, though, was inviting people in for books.
Wow. And as I understand, there's also like around the time you mentioned 1914, there was a state law that was passed that allowed for like, what was that about? Like for taxes to be collected to fund county library? Well, what happened there? And then how did that play out in Saratoga?
Sure. Yeah.
Sure. Yes. So since we weren't a city, it's like we couldn't form the library that way, but there was a lot of interest in it. So it sounded like it was the community members who really pushed for the county passing some laws that they were allowed to collect taxes for the libraries. And so finally the county did it, public pressure, but then it took like 5 more years.
Okay.
The community members say, no, we want to do this. We really want to do this. So it was 5 years after they passed that law that they finally started taking action. And that's when like the county system was able to actually start.
So the county system was formed, like you said, around 1914. And so Saratoga was part of that?
It was. So talking about the funding, it was a 1 cent tax.
Yeah.
Okay.
So
wow.
it was, yeah.
But that was a lot.
That was a lot back then. So
yeah.
$3,700 a year is what the county library had to run on.
For the whole county library?
For the whole county library system.
Okay.
And at that time, so Saratoga was the 4th library to join the system. Yes. And it really was an opportunity as a system to bring on efficiencies, right? So that we were able to then kind of be part of a bigger collection of books, right? Moving things around. There's always those pluses of being something part of a bigger something as the county system versus kind of just a separate entity.
What was Saratoga like back then in terms of what would the library experience be like if, let's say, it's a drugstore? What we started off talking about like what purpose the library serves today. In your mind back then, to a community member back then, what was the library?
Well, I think it really was, again, very much focused on books, right? It was putting books in hands. It was making sure that people had this access to knowledge that was, somewhat curtailed or very limited previous to that. So it was very much that knowledge transfer. I would say, though, one of the real things that we even see today is, as Saralyn was talking about, and maybe you want to kind of expand on, is that community involvement and the real desire for people to want access, right? To contribute, to have the library. So again, what that corner of the drugstore then grew into was really based on what the community's needs and desire really for libraries was.
Mm-hmm.
And I know that very much in Saratoga, there's just history of that upswell of support that made it this beautiful place that it is today.
Yeah. Looked like the town kept growing in size, and they always supported the library and wanted more. And that kind of prompted moves, out through the drugstore, and then did a few different moves as it kept growing, ended up in the church for a while. And finally, when it was clear that we needed our own space and our own building, when they started raising funds for that.
So tell us about that. So it started off in the drugstore, and then it went into a room in a church.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So tell us a bit about what happened there and some of that development.
It just kept growing. I think it made a couple moves. I believe it was it went to a bank for a little bit. There was a few different spots, and then it ended up in one of the rooms at the local Christian church for a while. And whoever was the librarian kind of shifted depending on who was there. So I think it was the pastor's wife or something with the librarian when it was in the church. So it was there for a while. And then in 1927 is when they wanted to start raising funds. The community was like, we need more. And they liked the books, the entertainment, and the knowledge and everything, but I think they wanted a little more service. And that's when they started looking at raising funds. And that's when the Women's Saratoga Foothill Club decided to take over. They kind of took charge of fundraising for the new building.
So the Foothill Club, for those that don't know, is a club that still exists in Saratoga today. It's a women's club that's been in Saratoga we're in 2025, about over 110 years now. There's a ton of history there, which is probably a separate story in of itself. But it's always been filled with sort of leaders and women of the community that take an interest in civic items, but also just taking the community forward. And so it seems like this, along the lines of that history, wanted to take the library step forward too. So what do they do?
So they formed a committee of community members to raise funds, and they decided they came up with $12,000 was the amount that they needed to build a new library. The committee decided that they liked the location on the corner of Oak Street and Saratoga and Los Gatos.
Mm-hmm.
So they focused on that.
And is that location still around today, right?
Yes.
That is now the Friends of the Saratoga Library, but we'll come back to that. But
yes.
Yeah.
You're going to that. So they like that location. They put one of the committee members, Sheldon Patterson, in charge of going and negotiating with the owner of the lot for that. The little story out of that is that he went to try to buy it from her. He ended up convincing her to donate the land, and they ended up getting married. So it was the library that love built right there.
Persuasive, yeah.
Yeah. I don't know. And I think he also persuaded the senator to donate $1,000. So we got a lot from him. He was involved. So that's how we got the land. And then the other members just did fundraising around town. The other story about the fundraising was Grace Richards in the Foothill Club, and her strategy was she just went around to her friends and assigned them specific amounts to donate. She's like, you're going to donate $50. And they all did. So just the town members themselves all raised the money, and they built that library.
Talk to me about the experience of being a librarian around that time, right? So 1927, you're saying this actually right before the Depression, they raised the money to build out that library. What is the role of a librarian then, and how does that compare versus now?
It seemed to be at that time they just had one staff member. I wasn't clear if they were actually paid or a volunteer. When I was looking through, I wasn't totally sure what's going on there. But it was one person to run everything. So they were in charge of procuring the books, managing the collection, any programs, keeping it open, staffing it. It just seemed to be one person, and probably other volunteers coming in there as well. But there would be one librarian. And when you look back, they have a list of programs that they were offering in the space. A lot of them are very similar to some stuff we do today. The puppet shows, the different community organizations doing presentations, things like that.
Wow.
Yeah.
So 100 years ago was different, but also not that different too.
Yeah, a lot of similarities.
Yeah. And it seemed to be like there was a bit of a trend in the area too, because in Campbell you had a similar movement where they also formed. Who drove the effort there?
So the Campbell Women's Club did really, again, embrace it. Right. I think women's organizations very much have always been in that educational kind of arena. And so they too took on that charge of creating a space, a public library that was going to benefit their community. Wow. Again, that building is also still, that's a history museum where in Campbell now, because as you know, we're building a new Campbell Library as we speak.
Wow. And so coming back to this, for this library that was built, this is still now it's part of the county system. And so in terms of like the operations of that, similar to today, that's being run through the county and with the county in terms of funding, operations, like book circulation, things like that.
Yeah, I'm assuming the county must have been purchasing the books and
exactly.
supplies.
Mm-hmm.
So what happened from there? We're talking 1927, that you have a village library, basically a library in the village, a structure that still exists today where you can go and get great books now, but you can purchase books there now. We'll probably come back to that. But what happened next? I mean, I imagine, the city, the area itself is growing, World War II comes to an end, and this region and area starts booming. So what did that mean for the library?
It's always a story of growth, like the community, more people moving in. The library is very busy. They just need more services. So they were busy. And then in the 50s, a couple of things happened. The county library there was a library specialist they hired to like analyze the whole system and kind of give some suggestions for how to improve things. And they suggested hiring and training more staff to run. And this is for like all the county libraries, because at the time I think it sounded like each library had just one person doing everything. So the specialist was like, you need to hire staff and train them, and yet have a better process for acquiring the collection. And the other thing was the space, like more space, bigger buildings, because we were outgrowing. It was like there was twice as many books in the space, so it sounded like it was just jammed, not enough seating. We just need more. And then also we got a new county library director at the time that was, implemented all this. And so they were looking to make all those changes. And the community supported the library a lot. But what happened was we tried to put a bill for funding the new library in Saratoga. I think it was 1963.
A bond?
Something like that. Yeah.
Yeah.
But it didn't pass.
Okay.
Because it was lumped in with some other things that weren't as favorable. So it didn't pass at the time, even though it seemed like the community really did support building the new library.
I read about this. They were trying to, the bond itself was $1.2 million, and there were about 4 different items that were in it, of which the library was $250,000.
Right.
But the whole bond measure failed, so that then failed as part of it.
Yeah.
Talk just a bit more about, you talked about sort of this venture to go invest in more staff. And one element of that is like a professionalization of the role of librarian within the county. What did that mean? So does that mean you're going from like having like a volunteer librarian to a professional librarian? And what are the qualifications of a professional librarian? What have they studied, and what does that mean, and how did that change things?
So librarians, typically you have a graduate degree, like a master's in library information science. So at that time, I don't know if that was actually required at that moment in time, but so I'm assuming it was someone who probably went to school for it, had special training, and was actually a librarian. Up until then, it seemed to be like the first librarian, it was the wife of the store owner, and she kind of de facto became the librarian. So they were looking for the trained staff there, and then they also were looking for the circulation department, like someone helping with the collection and actually checking in, checking out. And they wanted a separate person. It wasn't that one staff person doing everything. And so they wanted a few different types of jobs and kind of piece that out a little bit, get more efficient, specialized.
Yeah, and librarians really come to the work with the skills, certainly around organization, right? And also building the collection, as we, call our things, right? So what does your community need? Who's in your community? What information needs do they have? What resources are being requested? And then professionally, how do you go out, procure those, right? Catalog them, put them in the right place. So you really had to build up those skills kind of in education and in your community. So you really understood what the needs were, and then making sure, right, that you're meeting everyone's needs, because that's really what the library is about. Something I need, it's something you need. So how do you balance those things? And I think that's where it was really required to have that. Technology was advancing a little bit in that it, literally was printing on tags, right? Dewey Decimal numbers and attaching them with glue, cleaning books with special cleansers. And they began some automation of how you might check out a library card. And there was like a press machine. It was a big deal at the time, right? The first of automation in libraries. So really, again, having that level of expertise that allowed you to serve the community well.
That's incredible. It's always amazing to me when you walk into a library and you can ask, hey, where do I find this? And the librarian always knows, right? And there's always, usually, I mean, they're used to hearing what the community wants. They probably have a sense of it. But I'll give an example. Like last weekend, came into the library with my nephew, and he really likes Batman comics and and he's 5.5. So there's like a certain age range of books that will make sense there. We walked into the children's section and happened to just ask the question to the librarian. They're like, I don't think we have exactly what you're looking for. I knew automatically that we didn't have exactly what my nephew was looking for in his age range. And then within 3 minutes, another librarian had come by and said, by the way, here's what might be interesting. And all without me even having to pull up to a computer or anything like that. Yeah, but it's incredible that expertise is there. And then I went on the other side of the library, the adult side, because I want to get a book. And I was able to pull up the catalog, pull up the number, and find it. But, I've also been trained, having come to this library, by the resources that we have here. And so, yeah, that professionalization, I think, makes a lot of sense. It's also, I think, the other... we used to have a volunteer firefighter department here, right? And then over time, that also became professionalized, where, it can't be something that some, residents are doing in their spare time, right? And on the other hand, it's sort of like a real incredible spirit of volunteerism. You mentioned, it might be like the store owner's wife who's becomes the de facto librarian, that just sort of serve the community that way. But at a certain point, the city, the population gets so big that you can't just do it on a volunteer basis anymore. You actually need to professionally staff it. Seems like that's a theme in general we've observed over the last century. So now we're getting to the 50s. The staff is professionalizing. Saratoga's growing more. What happens next? And we basically have one branch at that point, which is basically in what is today downtown Saratoga at Oak Street and Saratoga Los Gatos Road. So now, and there's this bond measure to try and get funding to invest in another facility. That fails. What happens next?
So from there, since that failed, then the county library got lots of meetings, what to do. I think there was discussions on having more branches in Saratoga, and what they ended up doing is opening the Keto Park Library.
I grew up there. Yeah, it's fun. Yeah, right.
So they opened the Keto Park Library.
Yeah.
The location they liked because the bookmobile already had a spot there and it was popular, so they knew that would be a good location. And the county library funded building that, and so we had 2 locations then for a while. So that kind of held us over.
And is that where Jean's Fine Foods used to be? Jean's is this grocery store, and it's like the Keto Shopping Plaza.
Yep.
Yeah. So basically, it's like Cox in Saratoga. Yeah. Basically, so behind that, there's a shopping complex that is actually in the process of being turned into townhomes.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. But it used to be a very popular grocery store with a lot of different shops and things like that around there. And so the Keto branch of the library was there for Saratoga.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. And then, that's number. So the Oak Street, when they were talking about opening that one, the Oak Street Library, the circulation from 1957 to 1966, so about 10 years, it had grown 605%. So we really needed more service.
When we say circulation, is going the number of books.
And going in and out, yeah.
And that's because members of the community are coming in, they're asking for a book, it's not there, so then we need to get it from another library in the system, or what does that mean? Or buying more books, or what is that?
They probably were buying as much as they could, but it was just, the heavy checkout.
So circulation is checkout. Okay, that's what you mean by that. Okay.
Yeah. So yes, it was definitely popular and we needed more. The Keto branch held us over for a while, and then in the 70s they were looking at going another bond measure, and that one passed. There was lots and lots of support for it in the community. The Foothill Club did the initial building. The Friends of the Saratoga Libraries took over and kind of really helped the fundraising on that one. And that seemed to be, when I look back at all the articles, lots of community support. The only big like debate was the location. There was lots of kind of back and forth of location. It ended up here, on Saratoga Avenue.
And so the current location's at Saratoga and Foothill Avenue. Tell us a bit about that. I read about this too in terms of this debate around location, because basically this went to a vote in all of Saratoga, and everyone kind of wanted the library nearer to them.
Yes.
Was that sort of the dynamic? Yeah.
That's the feeling I got when I looked over it. They kind of, they wanted the locations nearest to them.
Yeah.
Or they would have loved to be able to keep all the locations. So there's a lot of that. It sounded like they ended up going with this one. It was city owned, land. That kind of makes it easier to work with. We're close to schools here and close to the other, city center. And overall, it worked out well.
And this land is still owned by the city, right? And then the land is leased to the library district. And for the operation of the library. And I was reading about this too, where the city actually bought this land, and City Hall's right down the way, with the intention of this basically being like a central park for Saratoga, and then it turns into the library. But it technically, actually, our Heritage Orchard, which is what surrounds the library today, is technically a park for the city of Saratoga.
That's amazing.
Yeah. So it's serving that purpose, but with the library at its center now.
And I would say your orchard here in Saratoga is one of the most successful community orchards in the county. It's really, it's a lovely space, and it also lended a lot of influence to the library.
Yeah. And so this is like the late 70s that this becomes a branch?
Yeah, it was 78.
Okay. So this becomes like the sole location for the Saratoga Library. And what happened to the one in downtown then at that point? Do we know?
For 5 years, they kept both open. But at a certain point, the county library realized we just couldn't afford to staff both. And so they ended up closing that one.
Okay.
And then, but it's this beautiful building, historical building. The community loved it. So we wanted to repurpose it. And it looked like a lot of different groups were interested in it and applied to use it. And eventually it was the Friends of the Library, was the one who ended up occupying it. And that was great. So Friends of the Library opened it, and now it's a used bookstore. And they sell books. They run that, sell books, and use all the funds to directly support the Saratoga Library.
So you can go to a store in Saratoga that has used books from the library, and you can purchase them. It's at Oak Street and Saratoga Los Gatos Road, right by our downtown, right next to the museum, actually. So you can go and have a full day. You can go and buy some books. And you can go to the Saratoga History Museum next door, and you can just get a sense of all things Saratoga. So this is one of my little secrets of buying gifts for people is to go to that, because there's actually a lot of really cool sort of older historical books that you can get for a price there that you can't get anywhere else. If you were to find that on some antique book website, it would be multiples of what you get here, but it's also just incredible quality. And you can find some really thoughtful gifts. You can buy all sorts of things there, puzzles, CDs, I think, all sorts of books and different things like that are pretty special. So really encourage you to go check it out. And so tell us more about what happened with this location, because there was a sort of a bigger change too that happened in the late 90s, early 2000s, right?
So of course, again, we're very popular and kind of outgrew the space. And again, it was we had twice as many books as we should have. Seating, same thing. There was no seating. There was a story the commissioners, when they were looking at making arguments for getting more space. He came in and saw one of the kids had turned over a garbage can and was using it as a chair because there was no more chairs and stuff like that. So we just needed more. And usually when they build library buildings now, they kind of plan for about 20-year lifespan.
Okay.
And so it hit that 20-year mark for sure. So the Friends of the Library, again, took up that cause and did lots of campaigning, mailers, articles, and helped us pass another bond measure for a renovation and expansion. And so we added a lot. It went from 18,000 square feet to 48.
Wow. I remember that old library, by the way, because I was, we moved to Saratoga in the 80s when I was 2. And so I spent a lot of the late 80s and 90s at that library. And I can still remember where I used to read a lot of Goosebumps or things like that. I could literally in my head walk you through, the map in my head of walking to that portion of the library where the Goosebumps were and where the the other like mystery. There were so many different.
Choose your own adventure.
There were
Those
so
kind of things.
yeah, but I remember there was the adult section, the children's
Yes.
section, and kind of like the checkout section in between. But I remember it also being a lot smaller than what it is now.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, that was a huge expansion. So it was nice. Yeah. I mean, now we're over 20 years. We got a lot of space, and that was great. It was nice that we were able to get that much, and I think it's lasted. But we are a little bit getting to that point. We could always use more space for seating and shelving. More meeting rooms would be nice.
So so basically we had a successful bond measure that was largely driven, or basically entirely driven, by the Friends of the Saratoga Library, which is a nonprofit that still exists today. That is a lot of incredible work. How has the library evolved in the last like 30 years, right? Like, because a lot has changed, right? Like the internet in the 90s, you know, and it's also changing a lot today. Sort of tell us about that time, because you sort of go from like the library maybe being more book focused to now facilitating technology, educating the community on. How did that happen? What happened there?
Actually, I mean, when I started as a page, we had the card catalog still in the library, and we were just starting with the computer catalog. So yeah, it's changed
And the
a
card
lot.
catalog is a physical.
Yeah.
What is that?
When you had those physical cards, and gosh, you had to make at least 3 or 4, right? Yeah, it had the drawers, and it would have the title, and you'd have to have a card duplicates, like, so you could search under the title, the author, under the subject. Every time someone took one out, you had to go back and refile them. It was a whole before the computer catalog.
Yeah. I mean, it was very book focused, right? Like that was the intention around libraries. And so people still, right, they think about libraries as books. However, really they are community gathering knowledge centers, right? They're interactive spaces for people to come and really get the information that they need. So over the years, you see, first off, formats change, right? So you'll have now what we used to have big encyclopedias on shelves. We now offer that in a digital way, to the point of people gathering together. Right now, they need a little more individual space to take a virtual meeting. And so libraries really have to be thoughtful about creating flexibility in their design, right? In that we want to be able to be a physical space with access to materials of all different formats for all different needs, all different accessibility, and also iterate, right? And be able to be responsive to community needs. We have, over the last, I would say, 10 years, once again, you began to see the emergence of digital materials. Some people will never darken our doors again, actually, because they are finding all that they need in downloadable materials, in ebooks, online. So there's on your phone, exactly, right, through apps. And at the same time, we know, especially since 2020, the need for connection. So bringing people back together, and whether it be teleworking, right? That we've seen libraries become spaces for that, being places where we have power and cool when you might not have that at home. So that
The library serves as a cooling center on the hottest days of the year, where let's say you don't have air conditioning or can't afford it, or maybe you can't afford Wi-Fi, you can come here and all those things will be provided for you.
You can charge your devices, right? We actually work with PG&E here in Saratoga. You guys often have, threats of wildfire or various things. So they might put you in that situation where you don't have power at home. So we really work with them to bring a generator in so that we can be that space. So again, how are you really creating physical space that is flexible and responsive is very important for libraries. We still have stuff, and that's still very, very important, because we want to immerse, especially young children, right, in an area of books, for them to see kind of and hold on to those important things. And that, I think, is public libraries as a whole. That's a sweet spot for us, for sure.
So we're sitting in 2025. It's funny, like the number of people around me are always talking about AI tools and just how like all the information or knowledge you need is now there. How are you thinking about that? And how do you think that'll evolve with the library, or even just today?
I mean, we're having conversations about it, talking about it a lot, and kind of like, what should we be offering, or how should we be talking about it? We're kind of beginning stages of it right now.
Yeah. And when you use the word literacy, most people will say, yes, that's how to read. However, it's really about literacy in so many different ways. So digital literacy, as we were saying, this room has transformed, right? Its space, but we do offer classes and opportunities for people to interact with technology, for them to rediscover a new way of doing something that is really enhanced through tech. I would say libraries also embrace the new, right? We have opportunities to kind of have different experts come in, talk about how technology can improve your life. And so we really want to encourage people in that digital literacy space as well to learn about it. And, they say certainly, you can Google it, and that is true. However, librarians actually can help people understand the right way to do searches, to how to use the internet more successfully to get to the right information. And so that's very much in our toolkit as well to kind of facilitate that learning.
Libraries are pretty incredible, right? Just hearing you talk about it, an individual can have to exploring their imagination, exploring knowledge, but then also connecting with their community. And that's sort of what, the library serves multiple spaces in that regard. Jennifer, I don't mind putting you on the spot. You shared a really incredible story about a connection that you and your family have to libraries.
Absolutely. So once upon a time, as I like to say, there was a family that lived on the top of a public library in New York City. And this was right after World War II. And the reason they lived on top of the library was because they had a job there. So the father was the custodian or caretaker of the library. And this was a huge benefit, right? To be able to have a safe, comfortable place to live. And so that little boy in that family was actually my father. So he would tell us stories of not being able to wear shoes when he was at home during the day because you had to be very quiet in libraries, but also getting the run of it when it was closed, right? And so sliding on those floors, still no shoes, and being kind of immersed in books. And so I have always kind of come full circle to that's how libraries, again, have always played a really special part in my life, and feeling really privileged to be able to offer that out to people and help them make those connections as well.
Wow. What's a funny or interesting story that's happened in the Saratoga Library, if either of you want to share?
I got some stories from the staff here.
Yeah.
Some things they remembered over the years. One was our children's supervisor, Alan. We were talking the other day about draw and tell stories that we used to do in story times. And it's this whole, you're telling a story and you're kind of drawing a picture on the board as you do it. And in the end, it's like revealed it's a monkey or whatever. And both he and I are like, we're not great artists. So we always tried to do these in our story times, but we weren't great at it. And he said, one day he was on the children's reference desk. A grown man comes in and is like, Mr. Allen, I remember you from when you used to do story times. He was at Santa Clara City Library before. He's like, I used to come to your story times. And Alan said that whenever he did the draw and tell stories, he would always end it with like, this isn't great. You kids, you should go home and practice. And, you're going to do it way better. And then I want you to come back and show me how to do it, well. And this guy said, I used to come to your story times and I remembered that. And he took it to heart and he would go home and practice drawing. And it actually started this love of drawing for him. And he was now like in school for art. And he just happened to see Alan again and remembered. Alan just couldn't believe that he remembered of him. So it inspired him to his career now. Yeah. And some the adult staff have story of this year, or the day before taxes were due. We had a 90-year-old patron come in, and her husband had recently passed away, and he always had taken care of the taxes. And she was just really flustered because her Wi-Fi had gone out at home, so she didn't have computers, and she needed to get the 1099 form from the bank. And she couldn't get into her bank account to download it, and she was, didn't know what to do. And so the librarians helped her kind of go back and forth to the bank and be able to log on, showed her how to download the form and print it. They got it all done, got her all set, and she just burst into tears at the end of it. She was just so relieved that she got the help.
Wow.
And that's it's not uncommon, that sort of thing. We have, people coming in all the time that have been directed to go to sign up for something or a website, and they just kind of get lost and don't know for sure. And the librarians help guide them. And since that comes up a lot, we have a volunteer that helps with a digital literacy drop-in session. We have it's Thursday mornings at 11. You can come in. So every Thursday, one of the weeks is digital literacy, and they'll just help teach people, and other ones it's just like a drop-in tech help.
Tell us a bit about a very recent change the library made, which was the introduction of the Children's Play Center.
Sure.
What sort of drove that change, and how are you thinking about it?
So holistically, what we know is that children need to be active learners in order to become strong readers and students. And here in Santa Clara County, in some of our communities, less than 50% of the children are reading at grade level. And even here in Saratoga, where you're hitting more 75, 80%, to me, 100%, right? We want all children reading at grade level. And that starts very, very early. So we really embrace that idea of a program over a decade ago that in public libraries is called Every Child Ready to Read. And what it is it's not just about reading. It is about reading, but it is about playing and writing and talking and singing and really being engaged in so many positive ways. So over the last decade, through programs, through different resources, we had Lego tables, we had, fun art programs, and we kept iterating and adding and evolving and seeing the benefits from bringing little ones in at those very first 5 years where all of those neurons are getting connected. And so we wanted to, again, help support families, encourage relationships with our schools. And so we built this space for the community to come. It is very much a immerse experience in letters and numbers and words so that children actually can physically be in a space. They can be balancing on the first letter of their name, which will teach them about letter recognition, as well as help them develop the physical skills they need to be able to track text, for them to balance on things so that they are, again, those kinds of learners that as you're doing it and you're going from one step to another and using sight words, kind of using those connections, that words matter. So it's been very exciting. It's called Storybook SCCLD. We have a new and special one in each library. So it is unique to your community. It has, you'll notice, redwood trees. We have one right outside of the library. It has animals that you will find, and you won't see any people on the graphics in there because the children, right, it's their world. They are here in the storybook. And so we really want them to have that chance for imagination and learning with their families. And honestly, with one another. I think what we've seen is caregivers and parents interacting with one another, children learning how to cooperate. So it's really been a learning gathering place. We're excited about it.
And we were lucky in Saratoga to be the first one to open.
You guys were number one.
But it's opening all over the county now. And and I think we've been getting rave reviews, and the attendance has been through the roof here. I feel like the parking lot's always full. Right by now,
Yes.
Which is pretty incredible. So with that, I'd like to close with a question, which is for each of you, what's an example of kindness you've experienced here in Saratoga?
Every day, I'm kind of new. I've been here a couple years, so it's like new to this library, and I just got so much support, I think, from the community. Our friends group is amazing.
Saratoga, again, has, as the history has shown, very much embraces the library and very much comes to the library. I would say that it is a place where you feel that you belong, right? So you walk into this library. The design of this building, actually, as we talked about being here in the middle of the orchard, is around a drying shed. The architecture is around this fruit right here, the harvest here in the middle of a drying shed. When you sit in this library, you can see outside from any of our seating areas. And I think people really appreciate that. I think
I didn't know that, actually.
They do, yes.
Yeah.
So, and if you look at the architecture inside, the wood beams are reminiscent of trees. The lights over the reference desk are apricot. so the colors, and again, representative of the fruit. And so I really hope as people walk into this that they feel it's representative of their community and it's embracing who they are. So it's that space of belonging. And that's what I see, right? When we see people come through the doors with smiles on their faces, they always are so grateful to all the wonderful service that the team provides to the community. And I think just that interaction is really joyful to watch as well.
Well, thank you both for the time and for hosting us here in the library. I really appreciate you, spending the time doing the research. One fun fact, there's actually a book we have on the history of the Saratoga libraries called A History of Saratoga's Libraries by Willis Peck, and you can get it here at the library, right?
Yes.
Yeah. And so we really encourage you to, come and visit the Saratoga Library, come visit the Friends of the Saratoga Library at Oak Street and Saratoga Los Gatos. And then while you're doing that, also go and check out the museum, which is next door, and then spend a day in Saratoga. Check out downtown, check out the orchard, frequent our businesses. We have a lot of beautiful hikes and things to see and do in the area. Again, thank you so much, Jennifer and Saralyn. We'll wrap this episode with what we always end with, which is please do send us your questions, your feedback, stories you have about the library, whether it was for how if you remember one of the bond measures or maybe a personal experience you've had coming here. You can reach out to us at podcast@saratogahistory.com, and we look forward to being in touch. Thank you.